Welcome to another edition of the NCBI podcast. I'm June Tinsley, Head of Advocacy and Communications with NCBI, and delighted to have you join us today. My guest today is Senator Martin Conway, and thank you for taking the time to have a chat with us.
My pleasure, June.
Great. And people obviously know who you are, but I suppose for those who aren't as overly familiar with you, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of course, no problem, June. And listen, thanks for the opportunity to speak on your podcast. I'm from County Clare, that's where I hail from, Ennisdiamond in North Clare. I was born in 1974, and I was born with what's known as congenital cataracts, which means they're cataracts that I was born with that were hereditary and were passed down from my father, who in turn inherited from his father. So back in 1974, the procedures in the medical science wasn't as advanced as it is today. So my father, in his wisdom, decided to bring me to London, where the cataracts were removed. But again, in 1974, technologies weren't as good as they are today. So I was left with a severe vision impairment, and my level of eyesight would be under 20%. So I am legally blind, and I also then, I suppose, as a result of the surgeries and the cataracts and so on, I would have a tremor in my eye and in both eyes, and I actually only look through one eye at a time. But because I've lived that all my life with those conditions, I don't notice any difference. So I've never been fully sighted. I've never had more than 20%. So I don't know what it's like to be fully sighted, whereas many visually impaired people would have been fully sighted and would have lost their sight, whereas I never had the sight in the first place. So that's a brief background. I grew up then in Ennisdiamond with my family, and I went to integrated education, both primary and secondary, and I went on then to UCD, where I did a degree in economics and politics. Went into business briefly for a few years, was elected member of Clare County Council in 2004, was re-elected in 2009, and I was elected to Senator then on the 29th of April 2011, and was re-elected in 2016 and re-elected again in the last Senate election in 2020. So that's a very brief biography of Martin Conway.
Well, thank you very much, and congrats on all your accomplishments so far.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, what would you perceive to be the main challenges that you face every day living with the only 20% vision?
There were many. There were some more than others. As a politician representing rural Ireland, not being able to drive is the single biggest obstacle and the single biggest challenge. Of course, in politics is a people business. So recognizing people is a gift that many of my colleagues have, and recognizing faces and being able to add names to faces is a unique gift that very experienced politicians have. But because I don't recognize faces at all, it's a gift that I will never have. And as such, the recognizing of individuals and even people I know very well that I would meet that I wouldn't recognise can be slightly embarrassing, but then it does send home the message that I am somebody with a severe eyesight difficulty. And people more often than not now, particularly colleagues, will, if they think I'm struggling to recognise them, very quickly they'll tell me who they are, which is something that is, it means that they're comfortable with my disability, and it makes life a little bit easier for me. Obviously, reading is a major challenge because I fall within the realms of not being totally blind and obviously not having an adequate level of sight to be able to read and even read large print. So if I was totally blind, I would have had to learn Braille, and obviously I don't have the skill set of Braille, which is a disadvantage. So because of that, then I have to prepare probably more than most. I have to be on top of my brief. And because when I do go speaking, I have to speak off the top of my head. I can't read a script. if I'm in Shannon, I have to speak without scripts or without notes because I'm not in a position to read them. And if I'm doing television or radio interviews, I again haven't got speaking points in front of me because I can't read them. So essentially, I have to know my speaking points and I have to be prepared for everything I do. I have to be better prepared than most colleagues for everything I do. And I have to, I suppose, be able to think on the spot, and you build up those skills over the years. So I suppose there's a myriad of challenges, a myriad of difficulties, and a myriad of obstacles. But like it's life, and I suppose I have successfully overcome them over the last 17 years in public life. And I'm a member of Shannon today, and I'd like to think that the fact that I have overcome them, that it would, I suppose, send out a signal to other people that that there's ways and means to achieving your goals.
Yes, very much so, and it's great to hear that, because certainly, as you say, being a public figure and being representing your constituents, you genuinely you can't anticipate every single question that's going to be thrown at you, or you can't anticipate issues that might be raised, and yet you need to be totally across your brief all the time. It does pose pressure on you, and you've certainly been able to rise to that challenge by all accounts.
Yeah, and the thing is that colleagues of mine would have a suggested response to most issues. So if they were attending a public meeting, or if they were attending a media interview, and they would have suggested responses and speaking points on a whole range of issues. So I don't have that luxury. So like I have been in a situation where I've just had to explain that I didn't have the answers, and I think people appreciate that too.
Well, correct. I mean, people prefer honesty, particularly amongst politicians, so that you can be upfront and say, "Listen, I'll come back to you on that."
Yep.
Is more of a favourable response than trying to waffle through it. And
Indeed.
I suppose you've outlined there some of the challenges that you face. But can I ask, in your view, what do you think are some of the other barriers preventing people in general who are blind and vision impaired from living their life to the max, and what you think the solutions would be?
In my view, the solutions are in the future going to be technology based, and I mean, a lot of work has been done now in schools and universities and even primary schools. When I went to integrated education in the late 80s, early 90s, down in County Clare and in Estymon, there wasn't resource teachers and there wasn't SNAs like there is today. The supports I had was a very nice man. He was the visiting teacher for the blind, who visited the school once or twice a year. And then I suppose my advancement and was very much reliant on the support of teachers who did go above and beyond the college duty, really, to give me the supports, and then neighbours and friends and family to give me the extra supports that I needed in terms of reading and so on. Whereas today, the state do provide a significant level of support for people with all sorts of disabilities and vision impairments. Now, an awful lot more can be done. And I think that there's the challenge. The barriers are there. When I was in college, I was involved with an organisation called the HEAD, the Association for Higher Education Access and Disability, that wrote policy documents for different disabilities, and I suppose essentially became the not necessarily the lobby group, but the advice structure that third level colleges relied upon.
Yes.
I'd like to see the same type of thing happening in terms of employment, because it depresses me all the time to see the amount of people with disabilities, and particularly the amount of people with vision impairments, who find it so difficult to get on the employment ladder. And if the supports are there, you have very bright people with vision impairments, and you have people who mightn't be so bright but have a huge amount to offer. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in using technology to, if you like, demolish the barriers. And also, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to encourage employers in the private sector, particularly, companies, to say, listen, if you give people an opportunity, and the government really needs to, I suppose, do a lot more in terms of providing financial support to the private sector to put in the necessary equipment, whether it's big screens for visually impaired people or whether it is technology associated with Braille and other technologies, because nobody wants a private company to be out of pocket by hiring somebody with a vision impairment. That said, if the government stepped up and did provide financial support, I am absolutely convinced that the private sector would benefit enormously from employing people with disabilities, because people with disabilities are not afraid of working harder, and they know that they have barriers, and are quite happy to roll up their sleeves and get on with it. Many of the vision impaired people I know have a great sense of get up and go. They just want to get on with it. Yes, they get cross and annoyed at the barriers that are there, but many of them just want to play their part in smashing barriers. And I think that there's a great determination in particularly the groups of visually impaired people who've gone through university for the last 20, 30 years, gone through colleges, gone through apprenticeships, and I meet people every day that that have achieved so much, but there's so many other people who are not reaching their potential, and that's why the conversation needs to happen between the state, private companies, and not in an adversarial way, but in a supportive and an encouragement way, and that's why internships that like the NCBI have a great internship where they take graduates onto a training program and give them the opportunity of paid work. And I know there's lots of other companies that do something similar, Citibank in particular, and but there's so much more potential for that. And I think that the greatest equalizer in life is for somebody to have a job, to earn money and to pay taxes, because that is what people do in life, and that then funds their family, and them buying a house, and participating in society, and that gives people so much fulfillment and so much satisfaction. And within the employment sphere, then people have the opportunity to grow and to get promoted and to show their skills. But it's that initial step onto the employment ladder in a meaningful way can be very challenging and very difficult for people. And I see that as the big challenge going forward. But I'm very optimistic because I know technology is improving constantly. When I got elected to the Seanad first, iPads had just been introduced, and it made life easier for me. Whereas had I been elected to the Seanad 10 years prior to that, there wouldn't have been iPads, and I'd have had to have stuff enlarged into very big print. Whereas now you can do so much work even on your phone. And I have no doubt that that's even going to continue. And I'd be very optimistic that maybe in 20 years' time, that somebody in my position will be able to sit into a Google self-drive car that'll bring them to work. And look at the equality that would create, because as it stands, when I travel to Dublin, I travel in public transport. So my time of departure from home is dictated to by the timetables that are available from Bus Éireann and Éireann Road Éireann and Dublin Coach. And while they are very generous and there's lots of options, imagine imagine the sense of empowerment your sense of equality that you would get if you were able to decide yourself what time you leave home and set a setting in a car and land to Dublin. It would make everything so much more efficient. So I think that there's a lot that can happen through technology to liberate people, and that would be my great hope, and that's why I'm a very strong advocate in terms of money being spent on research and adaptive technology and so on.
Yeah, I mean, you're dead right. Technology is such an enabler for people with sight loss. Certainly an area of work that NCBI is investing heavily in. And I suppose in connection with the employment piece, as you rightly identified, unfortunately, the number of people who are blind or vision impaired in the labour market is very, very low, at about 24%. And I do think, as you say, there's a key piece of work there of supporting employers, be they in the private sector, the public sector, or in the NGO world, of trying to support employers to be aware of the huge potential and to debunk some of the myths that employers can make, which can then kind of perpetuate and fuel the low employment rate. And certainly there are initiatives out there, but certainly more can be done to ensure that there's opportunities for people who are blind and vision impaired to take up a breadth of employment opportunities, whether it's self-employment, part-time, casual work. And I think there's a key piece there around ensuring that the social welfare system doesn't compromise a person's ability to take up a range of employment opportunities.
Yeah, the welfare trap is a problem, and
it is, yeah.
We need, and I think that some body of work has been done already to at least address it, but more work does need to be done. I suppose, look, you're dealing with a situation where we're in the middle of a global pandemic, so a lot of things that should be done are probably on hold. But as time goes on, things are going to settle in that regard, and I would certainly hope that. The kind of the welfare trap or the disincentive, like people losing their medical card and that type of thing, because they're taking up employment. That type of, if you like, punishment for doing the right thing has to stop. And I think there is an acceptance across the political divide that we need to be encouraging people to take up employment and not discouraging them and certainly not penalising them. So I would be in full agreement with that analysis, June.
Yeah, and I suppose just from some service users would be highlighting to us that the social welfare system is exceptionally inflexible, because we know the social welfare system is like a maze essentially, and it's built on a very kind of paternalistic model of full-time 9 to 5 working pattern, whereas actually in reality people taking up employment opportunities could be engaged in part-time work or casual work or self-employment or whatever their situations are. So I do think the greater flexibility within the social welfare system is required as we move forward.
And I think the pandemic certainly has shown, and when we move beyond the pandemic and post-COVID, I think that we are going to have to be more flexible with the social welfare system. To be fair to the system, it did respond very quickly, literally almost overnight, to a situation where hundreds of thousands of people were out of work and they got their 350 pandemic unemployment payment. So what I want to see going forward is that type of flexibility becoming the norm within the social welfare system, because it's now known as the Department of Social Protection, and the idea is that it's supposed to be a stepping stone to people returning and getting into full employment. And I think that certainly there's an acceptance politically, having spoken on this issue at length to the former Social Protection Minister in terms of Regina Doherty, and the current one, Heather Humphreys. And I think Heather Humphreys demonstrated that the system has to become more flexible when there was a situation with a PhD student down in County Mayo
Yes, yes.
where that student was going to be in a situation where they were going to lose certain entitlements if they took up their PhD, because somebody with a disability. I'm not quite sure what disability it was, but the minister intervened and forced the system to provide flexibility. So no other person who was offered the great opportunity of doing a PhD will be in a situation where they lose that. So I think that we're starting on the journey, and hopefully the journey won't take too long. But certainly, I would be very hopeful that we'll see more flexibility going forward to encourage people to take up employment as opposed to discouraging them.
So, to conclude, what one piece of advice would you give a person who's recently diagnosed with a sight loss condition?
The first thing I would say is it is very traumatic, obviously, and very difficult and challenging when somebody is diagnosed with sight loss. But what I would say to them is there is help available, and to engage with the NCBI. There's huge supports there in terms of peer counselling, in terms of training, mobility training, and in terms of technology. We're in a different world now, and there is huge opportunities, and there's a very supportive community there. So reach out and seek help and seek advice and seek guidance, and you will find that there's fantastic supports. Again, during the pandemic, NCBI, along with other organisations, proved the work they do is phenomenal, particularly in terms of supporting people who find themselves in a difficult and lonely situation. I'm always an eternal optimist as best I can be, and I would just encourage people to engage with the services because they are there and they're very, very good.
Thank you very much for that advice. And I suppose if any listener is interested in availing of our services, feel free to call the info line 1850 33 43 53. And any concluding comments you'd like to make, Senator Martin Conway?
I've had the privilege of being a member of the Oireachtas, being a senator for the last 10 years. And, I've had the opportunity of being spokesperson in justice for 2 terms. And now I'm the spokesperson in health, which is an exciting and challenging brief to have during a pandemic. And health, I think most people realise now that our health service was underfunded and our disability services were underfunded. It's up to people like me to advocate to ensure that the proper fundings are put in place in a smart way to deliver real results to people, to make a huge difference to their lives. And, politics can work and does work. And, we've proved, I suppose, again, over the last 12 months that we have contained as best we can a pandemic that has done an awful lot more damage in a lot of other countries. And when time passes, it'll be shown very clearly that Ireland actually managed and performed it well. So we need now to harness those skills in terms of rebuilding a social care and a health service that when people need care and support and interventions, whether it's in the area of mental health, whether it is in the area of physical health, or whether it is in the area of providing the opportunities to people with disabilities, that happens. And I suppose as the only visually impaired member of the Oireachtas, I will always advocate in any setting or opportunity I can for better supports and services for the 220,000 blind and visually impaired people in this country. And any of your listeners whoever want to get in touch with me, they can, they'll get my email and that by just Googling me. And I'm very happy to give any advice or support to anybody at any time. I mightn't be able to resolve problems, but I certainly am there to listen and just to give advice and maybe connect people in with yourselves and the services, or with government departments where applicable. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity. It's great to catch up and have a chat, and to wish everybody good health and stay safe during these difficult times.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with you. And delighted that your door is always open for people with sight loss and for the constituencies in Clare. And I wish you all the best. And thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Joan.